Hello Minders, welcome to another Sketchbook Peaks. I'm doing another Inktober drawing, and I've got most of these rocks drawn out in non-photo blue. This is kind of what I'm going by, although I'm not copying anything here. I've kind of made my own composition. It's very much a vignette, and I realize you probably can't see this blue pen or pencil at all, but hang in there. Just notice a rough sketch of rocks, and I'm going to add some pencil next. I'm just using this photo to give me ideas of how the light is hitting, where the shadows and lowlights and highlights are. Alright, so now I've got a good bit of it penciled, at least the outlines. So at this point, I'm just kind of thinking about where I want hatching and shading, and giving myself some preliminary direction there. You know, rocks like this are just a great way to practice pen and ink, and it's an easy way to not have to struggle with your subject. I mean, you can see I didn't copy the position of any of these rocks. I made up my own composition, but it's just a bunch of round shapes. But what's interesting are all these facets that are facing in different direction. Now these are smooth rocks because they're in a water stream, but it gives you a lot of opportunity to do various darkened or lightened areas of hatching. So that's just a great way to practice pen and ink. Get yourself some reference of some stone. Different kinds of stone, all different kinds of stone. I was thinking about doing a painting involving this later. Totally different look, different kinds of cracks, crevices, and lines, but still easy and forgiving to draw. Great subject for practicing. So I'm just lightly indicating where some of these shadows and facets may go. And one way to do that, an easy way to do that, is determine where you want your lowest values, your really dark little recesses, and put those in. And you can of course revise this as you ink, but a lot of times I'll revise it a lot. A lot of times the pencil just gives me a starting point. Alright, so I'm getting near the end of doing these pencils, and as I said, this is just giving me some ideas of where to do the hatching. All of this can be erased, so it's a good preliminary way to handle the hatching and the shading. Ink is difficult to correct, and it's unforgiving. In a lot of ways, even more unforgiving than watercolor. So this process just kind of helps me to kind of ensure I'll get a satisfactory result. And even then, you know, pen and ink can kind of bomb, but I'm using a Unikuratoga roulette. The roulette supposedly turns the lead when you put pressure down to keep it sharp. I've never really found it to do all that much. It's just a nice pencil in the hand. Nice aluminum finish. I like it. And I was thinking about the watercoloring. I think what I decided I'm going to do is put down gray watercolor marker and gray, and just use that to tone it with. I want to try a variety of techniques. If you follow me on Instagram, you saw I did a toned paper, sort of almost a fantasy-like drawing of a forest, a deep forest with these gnarled trees. And I haven't done a lot on toned paper. I want to do more. So that was sort of a foray into that. And I want to experiment. I want to do a lot of try a lot of brush pens, or I should say some of the brush pens that I've messed around with and bought but never really done much with. I'm a chronic experimenter. I guess that comes with the territory on a channel like this. Alright, I think we can kind of proceed to the inking. Don't think I'm going to use a dip pen on this. I think I'm going to use, this is new. This is a Pilot dual tip brush pen. It's got this end, which is black, and these brush pens are they're fine, but if you put down pressure, it's kind of like a felt tip pen. You get a variegated line. A nice easy way to ink. On the other end is the same thing but gray, and it's one of the reasons I decided to do this, or color this or tone this in grays. And I'll probably pull out a Tombow marker to tone some of it too. So we'll see how this goes. Well, you know, I think I'm going to use it for the outlining. It's not fine enough for the hatching. I think I'm going to probably pull in a fine liner. I could pull in a dip pen because it'll do fine liner, but in this particular illustration I just don't want to mess with a dip pen. So I think what I'm going to do, since the hatching is really not fine enough for my tastes, I think I'm just going to use this to put in some of the outlines and some of the low lights. And it's nice because I can get fairly fine around the edge and then press and get that nice little heavy line underneath. And I'm just continuing to go through and add sort of outlines, delineations to these rocks. I'm not outlining them solid, and I always feel like that's a pretty good tip for pen and ink. You know, some people just go overboard in pen and ink and outlining something, which may be okay if you're doing a cartoon to do a heavy outline, but I kind of get it into this sort of dotted line approach as I get to the top where the highlights are, and then down in these recesses I add little almost kind of triangles of darkness. Alright, so that's pretty much all the outlining. Now I'm going to start some hatching, and I want to go lightly. So this is the Copic multiliner. It's probably the lightest one that they make. It's the 0.03, very, very fine. This would approximate the really fine lines that you could get with some dip pen nibs. Allow me to ink it faster, and I just want to mix it up in terms of the supplies that I use. And I may switch to a heavier pen. And as I go, I'm going to go back and erase some of the pencil so I can see what kind of tone I have in the hatching. Yeah, like that. Let's keep going. I like to change direction on the hatching every now and then. I just think it looks interesting. But I also like to follow contour that I am trying to portray, the contour of the rocks that I'm trying to get across. On a flat facet, it doesn't really matter, but you know, if you can add a little bit of suggestion of how the rock is turning and curving, the form, I like to do that with the hatching when possible. So as I come forward on the rocks, I'm finding the 0.03 a little bit fine, so I'm switching to a 0.05. It's a little bit bolder, and as the scale of these rocks increase, again with a dip pen I could kind of make those adjustments by pressure, but a fine liner is just an easy, stress-free, quicker way to do it. With so much hatching on these rocks too, I just feel like I can get more consistent with the fine liner. And of course, maybe it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, if you like doing pen and ink, which I do, they're great ways to do studies. You don't always have to do a study with paint and pencil. There's something about ink that really makes you think hard about the values and how to simplify those values. And I just think it makes your painting better. After doing about a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen rocks, you know, you kind of get your hatching spacing down. And usually I'm either drawing the pen towards me or pushing it away. Just whatever is comfortable for you to get a even spacing rhythm going. And you know, you can also just have a surface where you can turn this to get your hand. Do whatever is comfortable. You know, don't just because you see somebody doing it a certain way and you go, oh, I can't do that. That's really uncomfortable. Well, don't do it that way. You don't have to. You want to hatch in a certain direction, but you know, your hand feels more comfortable, then just turn your piece. I'm getting very close to being done now. One of the things you may have picked up on, although it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm doing a thing called feathering. And it's harder to do really with a fine liner, which is a sort of a semi-weight, but you can still do it. It's a little more expressive and a little more dramatic with a dip pen. Feathering is just going from thick to thin. Now you may not be able to tell, but all I'm doing is I'm flicking up, and this goes down to a point. Now granted, there's very little difference, but you put enough of those lines together, you know, you've got a little bit of a fade out. If I were doing that with a dip pen, and I'm just going to use a zebra brush pen, which simulates a dip pen a little bit, you can get a little more dramatic effect. Very thick to just disappears. It works with these fine point brush pens. It also works with dip pens. But fine liners, you can do it too, and I actually do that a lot. I kind of flicking the way that I want it to fade away. You can also just get a very even line, where you want a very flat tone. These are texture techniques you should experiment with and play with. Sometimes, I'm moving quickly. I'm doing a fairly even line, but like if I want to cross hatch up here, I'm going to do that little feather technique right there. What that does is it turns that from an edge to more of a rounded edge. As I mentioned earlier, turning these kind of things into studies. I'm thinking the whole time as I'm drawing this, I'm thinking the whole time what I would do if this were a watercolor. It's just a great thinking exercise. I don't know if I'll ever turn it into watercolor, but the more I mess around with this and the more I do this, the more I think, this would make a pretty good watercolor. I should do it. I've got lots of those ideas floating around, but you get the idea. Alright, so I think I'm going to work on, this could actually be water in here, this could actually be a pile of rocks in a dry riverbed, I don't know. But I think I'm going to treat it as water. I'm going to get that brush pen, and it's a little bit, this is a little finer, this zebra brush pen is a little finer than what I started out using, that brush pen. But it's dark enough that I can add some heavier lines. And I wanted this to be more or less a vignette, so I'm not going to get too carried away with like ripples and stuff. I still want to go back and add some gray, like a watercolor marker. I'm going to just add some nice shadowy little base lines here, which will help this to pop. Alright, we're going to work on these trees up here. I think I'm going to leave that fairly light tree line there, but this one just behind, I'm going to give some tone. So it's sort of a hatching, but it's more almost like a contour line that I'm using just to kind of carry the idea of foliage. And I'm getting just about done with this. I'm going to go in and try some toning with this really light Tombow watercolor marker. It's gray. I'm going to start with the darkest areas and just kind of see where I want to go from there. And you could do this with watercolor, obviously. I want to make some areas darker than others, just to add a little extra dimension. So for all practical purposes, it's a line and wash, even though it's a marker. Yeah, I like the way that's looking. I like the effect that it's giving. Just adds another nice little pop to the toned areas. Well, I think I'm pretty much done with that. I like the way that's worked, and I don't think I want to overwork it anymore. Hope y'all enjoyed that. Hope you'll get out your ink supplies and give it a try. A lot of you are. I'm getting a lot of great comments that you're getting into Inktober, and I think that's great. Thanks, patrons. We'll see you in the next video.